Welcome everyone. Congrats to the Americans who are joining us on the 4th of July celebrations. Maybe some of them won't be there, but have a nice 4th of July anyway. This is Sephardic World. We are bringing you weekly talks about Sephardic history and genealogy. And as always, we are thankful to our patrons who make all of this possible by their valued contributions. With us today is Marius Heemstra. He is a genealogist in his free time, and he has some degrees, and he has written a very interesting dissertation on the Fiscus Judaicus and the parting of the ways, which goes back to the 1st century. And he is also the genealogist of the Jewish branch of his family. I met him for the first time at the grave of his ancestor Abraham Levi Vitoria, Italiaender, and he has a very interesting tale to tell. Over to you, Marius.
Yes, good evening, everyone. Can everyone see the presentation I'm going to give? Yeah, thank you. Well, it is about the Italiaender family, alias Levi Vitoria of Amsterdam. I think it's a very interesting family in the sense that they were, a few of the members were both members of the Sephardi, the Portuguese community of Amsterdam, and also of the Ashkenazi community. And in that sense, it's a rather unique family. Perhaps also because it was a family from Italy and not so much from Portugal or Spain. But that's something that we could discuss later. Can I go to the next slide? How do I do that?
You can use your cursors.
Yeah.
And then take the right one, and to go back, take the left one.
Okay, yes, I found, yes, thank you. This is the gravestone that Tom was talking about, the one in Berckheyde in Ouderkerk aan de Amstel, the Portuguese cemetery of the Amsterdam community. And this is the gravestone that, this is a very beautiful picture, was taken when the stone was removed from the place where it was cleaned and then photographed. And it has the graves of Abraham Italiaender and his second wife, Gracia de Campos. And I can show you some details. And as you can see, Abraham he died in 1699, and his second wife died in 1723. So that's those are the dates that belong to this grave. This is what the stone looks like. Well, I think already a few years ago, and you can see how quickly, things deteriorate. You can see that the marble is affected very much by weather and outside. Agencies. This is sometimes it's a sad thing to see how quickly this gets worse. But if you look at these pictures, they can be these are very good. Although you have many cracks in this part of the stone. This is the part of the side of Abraham Levi Vitoria, as you can see if you look a bit through the cracks. But you can clearly see his date, the death date or the year that he died in, 5460, which was 1699. And you could say that this is the Portuguese part of his grave stone. When we turn to the other side, then we find the part that belongs to Gracia de Campos. She's called Gracia Levi Vitoria on this stone as well. And as you can see, she died in 5483 and 1723. Well, there are some very nice details, perhaps typical for Sephardic grave monuments, because I will show you some stones later of the Ashkenazi cemetery, and they are much more. You will not find this type of carving of the stone there. This is the bottom of the gravestone. At the very bottom, you can see the name that he had in the Netherlands, Abraham Italiaender, which is Abraham from Italy, the Italian, in Old Dutch. The AE is also the old way that double A was written in Dutch in that century. And if we look at the Hebrew, you can see in the second line, you can see Abraham bar Benjamin Halevi. So Abraham, son of Benjamin Levi. And we will later find out that his father lived in London, or used to live in London. And in the third line of this monument, you can see that he was also known under the name Italiaender. So you can see in the Hebrew, you can actually find the word Italiaender. And that is something which is found on many gravestones in the Netherlands when you look at this family. Well, the first references to Abraham are from the 60s of the 17th century. The Barrios, who was the historian of the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam, notes that Abraham Levi Vitoria was one of the founders of the fraternity Gonen Dalim in Amsterdam in 1667. And we will come back to that because one of his sons was certainly also a member of that fraternity, Benjamin. And we will see later why we know that. And also, well, around 1670, we know that he apparently was in the tobacco business. He was a trader. He had a tobacco spinning factory. And he probably employed some 40 people spinning the tobacco. And to the right, you can see, a picture of that trade going on from that century, where tobacco leaves were cut up. And, apparently they called that spinning, and they produced tobacco that could be sold and used to smoke, usually in pipes. Then we jump a little forward to 1763, because in that year we find a document, a very important document for this family. It was a declaration by the heirs of Ester Italiaender. Levi Vitoria was the youngest daughter of Abraham and Gracia. They had 2 children, and Esther was the youngest child. And when Esther died and she had no children, all heirs went to the notary and they wanted a part of the inheritance. And you find dozens of names in that declaration. And it reads like the family tree of Abraham Italiaender up to 1763. Because he had 2 children with Gracia de Campos, but he had 8 other children. And he has a very large, in that sense, a very large family tree. These are the gravestones of both children of Abraham and Gracia de Campos. They were also buried at Berckheyde. And as you can see, they died in 1745 and 1762. To the left, you see the gravestone of Ester, which is not very well readable, but the side of Joseph, and I have made an enlargement of that part of the stone, is very well readable. But I don't think you can see it at the moment because these stones have the tendency to sink into the ground at that cemetery, and I haven't found these two yet. I know where they should be, but I haven't seen them yet. And you can see this is the gravestone of Joseph Levi Vitoria, and he died in the Jewish year 5515. Well, this is part of the declaration, and because of this declaration, we have a very good view of the family tree of Abraham. I don't know if you can see it, but there are a couple of numbers. There are 8 children being mentioned here, and those were the children that he had with his first wife, who was an Ashkenazi wife, Rebecca Hammelberg. And you can see the list of children. They're not actually in chronological order, but they are because 3 of the girls were actually born before the first boy was born, but the first boy is at the top. We see Isaac, Benjamin, Jacob, Mordechaij, Rachel, Sarah, Gracia, and Mariana, Italiaender. And I'm a descendant of Abraham and Rebecca, and of both Isaac and Mariana, because later on in this family tree, many cousins marry each other, and that's why I'm a descendant of 2 of his children also. When we turn the page, we find the 2 other children that he had with his second wife, Gracia de Campos, Joseph and Ester, that I just showed the gravestones of. And Ester was the last one who was alive. She died in 1762, and that's the reason why this document was made. And we have so many information about the children, whom they married, who their children were, and also that Abraham had 2 wives, because at some point people thought he had 3 wives, but we'll come to that. Because his first marriage was registered in 1673. And you can see at the bottom, you can see his signature, Abraham, Italian, van Venetia, from Venice. And under there, you can see Rivka Moses, Rebecca, daughter of Moses, and her last name was Hammelberg. And interesting here is that it's Abraham Italian. He's a tobacco salesman. He's 34. His parents are in England, it says here. And the name of his wife is mentioned, Rebecca. So here we get the information that his parents live in England in 1673. But they probably married, perhaps even 10 years earlier than that, because their eldest daughter, Sarah, of which we have a marriage registration from 1688, says that she was married when she was 23. That means she was born in 1665. And it says here that she was the daughter of Abraham Levi, he's called here. And you can see that she signs herself Sarah Abraham. So this is the reason why I think that they were already married some 10 years earlier. But at some point they needed to register their marriage with the Amsterdam town authorities. So that's why they did, but probably rather late. The first mention of Abraham in the Portuguese archives, in the Escamot, is in 1674. This is a list of people who donated money for the building of the synagogue or maintenance. But in 1674, the building was not finished. It was finished in 1675. So all these amounts that you see were done, and it's a long list of names and amounts, always in alphabetical order, looking at the first name. And you will find Abraham Levi Vitoria. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You can find him here, and he gives 18 florins and 18 stivers, 5-cent pieces. So this is the first time I found him in the archives of the Portuguese community as someone who gives a gift. His first Finta payment, so that is the tax of the Portuguese community, follows in 1681. So at that point, he's a full member of the community, despite the fact that he's married to an Ashkenazi wife, because she dies in 1688 and this is 1681. So he is a member of this community, apparently, in 1681. And you can see the third line from the bottom, Abraham Levi Vitoria, and he pays 10 florins for his Finta payment. But a very remarkable fact is that in the archive of the Ashkenazi synagogue, we find an entry that Solomon goaded Cohen, and Cohen is a family that also intermarries with the Italiaender family, also a tobacco spinner, that this Solomon Cohen buys some seats in the great Ashkenazi synagogue from his friend Abraham Levi Vitoria. The Vitoria sometimes is double T, sometimes Victoria, in this case, Victoria. So apparently, Abraham also owned seats in the Ashkenazi synagogue. Also around 1680, this is happening. And of course, that makes this painting by Berckheyde of the two synagogues in Amsterdam very meaningful for me because of Abraham and his sons. There is a connection with both the Ashkenazi synagogue, which is to the left, which was inaugurated, I think, 1672, a bit earlier than the Portuguese synagogue, that was inaugurated in 1675, and this painting was made shortly after that. So we have a view of both synagogues in Amsterdam, and the Italiander family had ties with both communities. I told you about the parents in England on his first marriage certificate. In 1678 and 1679, Abraham's uncle and aunt die in Amsterdam. They are called Isaac and Gracia Levi Vitoria. And, well, some time ago, it was not known whether they were even related to Abraham Levi Vitoria and the other Levi Vitorians. But I found some papers concerning an issue around their testament, their last will, where Abraham's father Benjamin is introduced. He is mentioned as an heir of them, also mentioned that he lives in London. But at the time that they die, the money goes to the Portuguese community. They also have no children. They die, and the money goes to the Portuguese community. And Abraham's father claims that he was mentioned in the will, and he claims part of the inheritance. And because he lived in London at the time, he gave a power of attorney to his son Abraham to settle this issue for him in Amsterdam. And this is a very interesting document that I found. It was made up by a notary public, a Dutch notary public in London, Lucas Eemans. It's written in Dutch, and it says exactly what I just told you, that Abraham, his son, should settle the issue that he has with the Portuguese community. But the witnesses that he mentioned are Antonio Gomez Serra and Manuel Lopez Pereira. They come with Benjamin to the notary public for this document. And I've looked up in the I've looked at the archives of the London, the S&P community in London, and these names appear over there. I think both at some time were Gabbai in the London community. So that, I think, that is a very strong link to the London community between Abraham and his father. When Abraham's first wife dies, he marries almost immediately Gracia de Campos. So now he is named Abraham Levi Vitoria from Venice. In the text, he's a tobacco spinner. He's a widower, and he marries Gracia Campos, who is much younger than he is. She's 31, whereas he is about 48 at this moment. And you can see the signature is now Abraham Levi Vitoria, and his wife apparently is not able to really make a signature. She makes some sort of round circle. And then after Abraham dies in 1699, I find another entry besides all the Finta payments that he does. I find this entry in the Escamot, and this is a donation of 300 florins from his heirs, mainly to mention his name a couple of times in the future, just to remember him. And this is shortly after he died. And I will just the main thing about this slide and the next one is to show you that his children with Rebecca Hammelberg, they all married Ashkenazi men, Sarah, Gracia, Rachel, and Mariana. And his daughter with Gracia de Campos remained unmarried. And actually the same is true for his sons. Again, Joseph, his last son, remains unmarried. And I don't know if there's a reason to that the so-called Portuguese children do not marry within their own community. They stay unmarried. But the other children, Isaac, Benjamin, Mordechaij, and Jacob, they all marry Ashkenazi wives, we could say. But then we get this request from the brothers Levi Vitoria to the Muhammad, also shortly after Abraham died. And this is a very interesting entry because it says that there is a request from from Isaac, Benjamin, and Joseph, Levi Vitoria, to become members of the Portuguese community. And in this declaration, they are granted a membership, Isaac, Benjamin, and Joseph. There are two other brothers, Mordechaij and Jacob. And I think Mordechaij appears in this as well, but he is here. He is, the scribe started writing his name and then crossed it out, because Mordechaij and Jacob are not admitted as members of the community, but the other three are. And then I'll just skip forward and then skip back to this one. 2 years earlier, or 3 years earlier, the Muhammad took the decision that mixed marriages were no longer allowed. So if you married an Ashkenazi woman, you were not allowed to be a member of the Portuguese community in Amsterdam. So with that in mind, we can see that here there is a reference to this decision. And they say, nonetheless, Isaac and Benjamin are admitted to the community as sons of Abraham, who was a full member of the community, because they were already married before this decision was taken. So they were already married before 54, 57, and that is why they are allowed into the community. And Joseph, of course, is no problem. He is the son of a Portuguese woman, which is said as much that he is the son of a Portuguese woman, filho de portuguesa, something. So he is admitted without any issue. But he cannot be much older than 10 at the moment, because, well, the marriage was from 1688. So Joseph is at maximum, he's 10 years old at the time he is admitted as a member of this community. And well, Tom Thielen has given me some information that around this time there were some issues with members. I think one member even got kicked out of the community because he married an Ashkenazi wife. And there is another example of men who were warned that they should only marry Sephardic women, otherwise they would lose their membership. So Isaac and Benjamin are accepted, although they are married to Ashkenazi wives. And 1 year later, Jacob and Mordechaij registered their marriages. And well, what is interesting in this case, I think, is that they have a very elaborate signature. They put down their full name, Mordechaij Levi Vitoria, alias Italiaender, and Jacob marries or registers at the same time, Jacob Levi Vitoria, alias Jacob Italiaender. So they really want to show that they have this name, and they want people to know that that they belong to this family. And when we look at the financial administration of the Portuguese community in 1701, then you see that all 5 brothers are mentioned. 3 are now members and pay the Finta, and the other 2 are mentioned under promessa, gifts. And as I said, Joseph could not have been older than 10 years when he was accepted as a member. And if you go through these books, through the archives, you will find, for instance, this is in the middle. This is one of the gifts by Mordechaij Levi Vitoria, not a member, but nonetheless, he donates money to the community. And this is the Finta as an example from 1709, 5470. And these are the 3 brothers that are full members of the community: Benjamin Levi Vitoria, Isaac Levi Vitoria, and Joseph Levi Vitoria. They appear again and again in these records. And also the seats in the synagogue, which have also, we have these in the archives as well. And then the one in the back is, I think they start out with a number of people, and if these people die, then there's a new name added to that seat, and so on and on. And so you see the back here, you see that here you see somewhere Isaac Levi Vitoria appears, and at the 6th seat, Benjamin Levi Vitoria here. And in a later version, they put down the situation at that moment, and then you see Isaac and Benjamin still having seats 2 and 6 in that bench. But now we turn to a notarial deed which was signed by members of the Ashkenazi community in Amsterdam, dated 1710. And there we find also three brothers, Italiaender. We find Isaac, Benjamin, and Jacob Italiaender. I'm always impressed by their handwriting, because it must be that they had a very good education. If you look at how nice their handwriting is. But they sign a deed that is signed by members of the Ashkenazi community in Amsterdam. And in that document, we find that the document is signed by the Parnasim of the Ashkenazi community and those who have the right to elect them, which in my view means that they were also members of the, and of course Jacob was not a member of the Portuguese community, but Isaac and Benjamin were, but they can also sign as members of the Ashkenazi community. This is, by the way, this was a document asking, I think, the town council of Amsterdam to grant them the same sort of regulations that the Portuguese community had. So there is some link to the Portuguese community in this document, and they're asking for a similar standing with the town council. But there's another important Ashkenazi link that you can find in this document, because Joseph van Emden is one of the Parnasim of the Ashkenazi community, and he's the father-in-law of Marianne Italiaender. She's the daughter of Abraham, so she's a sister of Isaac, Benjamin, and Jacob, and she's married to one of the the sons of Joseph, and her husband will also become a Parnas of the Ashkenazi community. So, and I think that's very interesting to see, because if you look at the Finta amounts that these brothers pay, that means, and then Abraham paid, that they were in the lower levels of the membership of the Portuguese community. But if you look at the marriages with the Ashkenazi community, you can see that they marry with the higher levels of the Ashkenazi community, always in the region of the Parnasim, or they themselves become leaders of the community. And this one is, I think, very nice, because here you can see the signature of Marianne Italiaender. This is her marriage registration in 1696. This is where she marries Alexander, the son of Joseph, who is then the Parnas of the Ashkenazi community. She is assisted with her father, and he is now named Abraham Benjamins. But look at her signature. She's 16 years old, and she can clearly write very well. So that, I think, that means that all the children from this family had a very good education. And then we move to Amersfoort and Nijkerk around 1710. We see that the family, the father has died, Abraham has died. Isaac and Benjamin form a company, Isaac and Benjamin, the brothers Isaac and Benjamin, and the other two brothers, Mordechaij and Jacob, also form a company in tobacco, and they move east in the Netherlands to Amersfoort. With regard to Isaac and Benjamin, and Mordechaij and Jacob go to Nijkerk, which is very close to Amersfoort, and they go there because tobacco is grown in those regions, and that is what they will do over there. This is a map of the Netherlands, and well, Amsterdam is here, Amersfoort is here, and Nijkerk is very close to Amersfoort. And this is about the region where tobacco was grown in the Netherlands, and they probably will use their tobacco as to mix it with imported tobacco to to make their own type of tobacco and to trade it. And they usually exported it to the northern part of Europe, to the Baltic. And that was where they sent their tobacco. And this is an old picture of a tobacco plantation in the neighborhood of Amersfoort. And I think that the growing of tobacco went on, I think, until the 20th century in the Netherlands, and then it was slowly died out. But this is a picture which is from Amersfoort, and this is where the Italiaender brothers went to grow their tobacco. But this is a picture of what you do. You grow the tobacco, and then all the leaves need to be dried. And as soon as they have dried enough, you can go and do the spinning of the tobacco and sell it. And this is actually, I think this is one of the finer houses, one of the most beautiful houses in Amersfoort. This is the one that once belonged to Benjamin and Isaac in Amersfoort, very close to where they built the synagogue. And it's still a very nice place to go. It's a very nice town to visit. So Isaac and Benjamin go to Amersfoort. They are tobacco merchants, but Benjamin is the first brother who dies. He dies in 1718. He must have been around 44. And it's a very, a lucky coincidence, but at least there is a sermão funeral dedicated to him. And as you can see on the page, Honen Dalim is mentioned here again. And the rabbi, Ishak Rafael Yuda Rodriguez, has written this sermon. I think it's about 15 pages long. And he compares Benjamin to one of the gems in the breastplate of the high priest, and that the high priest lost the Benjamin gem. That is as much as I could understand from the Portuguese in this case. But that, again, he was a member of the Portuguese community, links him very much to the Portuguese synagogue. Isaac dies a bit later in 1729, and they both are buried at Muidenberg. So despite the fact that Benjamin was a member of the Portuguese community, that a rabbi writes a funeral sermon for him, he was not buried at Ouderkerk, but he was buried at the Ashkenazi, the large Ashkenazi cemetery at Muidenberg. And this is the gravestone of Isaac. I'm still looking for the one of Benjamin. I know it's there, but I haven't found it yet. And this is a picture of the synagogue in Amersfoort that they helped to build. And they pride themselves that they are the oldest still functioning Ashkenazi synagogue in the Netherlands. I showed you the picture of the two synagogues in Amsterdam. And of course, the Portuguese synagogue still is used as a synagogue. But the Ashkenazi synagogue has become the Jewish museum in the Netherlands. So it's no longer functioning as a synagogue. So the Amersfoort synagogue is now the oldest in that sense. And they have a very interesting possession. They have a Sephardic Torah scroll dating back to the 17th century or even older, which is made of red deer skin. And I've asked an expert in this field if he could identify this as a Sephardic Torah scroll, and he could confirm that. And so this may very well have been in the possession of the Italiander family. It may even have been in the possession of Abraham, because I know from the testament, his last will of Abraham, that Isaac was given all his books and scrolls. So this could very well come via Isaac in the Amersfoort synagogue. And Mordechaij and Jacob go to Nijkerk. They have their tobacco firm there. They always have ties with Amsterdam. They probably still had buildings in Amsterdam as well. And these two families and their servants form the heart of the Jewish community there, which is a very small community. Mordechaij and Jacob, as we saw, did not become members of the Portuguese community of Amsterdam, but nonetheless, this community is known for the fact that they held Sephardic synagogue services. So that's a very remarkable fact. And Mordechaij and Jacob were also buried at Muidenberg. I found both of their gravestones recently. And on these gravestones, you will always find the name Italiaender as well. And this is also very interesting. When they had their house in Amsterdam, or their factory in Amsterdam, that was called In de Drie Jonge Italiaanders, In the Three Young Italians. And that has become a tobacco brand. This is not linked to the Italiaanders, as you can see on the pictures. There's a Jan Bulté is mentioned. There is a Cornelis Kuiper mentioned in Amsterdam. But this somehow must be linked to the tobacco industry of the Italiander family, because their building had a sign which says in the three young Italians. So this must be related to their tobacco business. And I can't explain the reference to London here. Not sure where that comes from. If that is in any way linked to Benjamin, their in this case their grandfather, but that's another thing that I cannot explain. But this is apparently this is a tobacco brand linked to tobacco traders in Amsterdam, but no longer to the Italiander family. And then we get another very interesting, this is actually a note that I received from Tom. Tom Thielen found this in the archives, and this explained to me why I kept finding Levi Vitoria family members in the archives, also in later years. Because here we have a request by Joseph Levi Vitoria, who was the only brother, it was the fifth brother, a son of Abraham and Gracia. He was the child of Abraham still alive. He is asking here to give Abraham and Jacob Levi Vitoria, sons of Benjamin, to give them, that they can become members of the Portuguese community. And apparently they did. Managed to get in. And this is probably why I find these names later on. It was a request by Joseph. And at this time, he could just say, well, Isaac and Benjamin Levi Vitoria were members of the community. Only Benjamin had sons. So he is asking the Muhammad to grant them also the membership. And apparently that was done. I cannot find a decision by the Muhammad, but I find them in the administration. So a number of grandchildren of Abraham, also all married to Ashkenazi women, become member of the Portuguese community. Abraham and Jacob, as we saw, were mentioned in the note. But also Ephraim turns up. And also sons of Mordechaij. Mordechaij was never a member himself, but at some point his children appear in the archives. Of course, we do not have a note from Joseph, but perhaps he was still involved in getting these people into the community. The note is from 1737, but already in 1738, we find that Jacob from Benjamin and Abraham from Benjamin, Levi Vitoria, have seats in the synagogue. So that was a very quick decision, apparently. They already are in the community. This is Abraham's gravestone. He was buried in Amersfoort. He was a member, apparently, of the Portuguese community, but is called the leader of his Ashkenazi community in Amersfoort. So there's again this double membership. And even some great-grandchildren can be found, two sons of Ephraim. And these are the last two, probably also the last two bearing the names Italiaender and Levi Vitoria. We find them in 1785. They are mentioned here, and they're probably the last ones of this family, because then the name Italiaender, the male line, Levi Vitoria, dies out in the Netherlands. And we thought that was the last of the Italiander family. Until I got some questions a few years ago, what about the Italiander family in Denmark, in Copenhagen? How do they relate to this family? Well, and that was, when I got some names, that was a very quick, the puzzle was solved very quickly, because it turns out that one of the grandsons, Jacob, a son of Benjamin, Jacob was also one of the last members that we saw. He was mentioned in the note from Joseph. He moved to Denmark in 1743, and a number of his nieces and a nephew from Amersfoort follow him. And two of the nieces, they have husbands named Mordechaij. They also have Italian roots, and they settle in Copenhagen, and they are also in the tobacco trade, the tobacco spinning business. And they found their own Sephardic synagogue in Copenhagen. And in Denmark, the names Italiaender and Mordechaij live on for a long time, much longer than for the name Italiaender, much longer than in the Netherlands. We have here a census from Copenhagen from 1870, and there are a number of Italiaenders mentioned here. There are two here, there are several down there. So the name Italiaender, still written in the way that it was on the gravestone of Abraham Italiaender, is found in Denmark, and I think in Denmark it lasted until the 20th century. The last descendant of Abraham Italiaender with that name died. Some of the information is in this book by Marius Smit van der Vathorst, but some of the things that I found are already confirming things that she suggests, or give a different account of what happened. Yeah, and this is the SAA 334 is the number of the archival number of the Portuguese-Israelite community in the city archives of Amsterdam, and you will find many entries in this archive where you can find names, the financial registers, things about testaments, the seats in the synagogue. And a very interesting one is 860. There is a debtor's book of a tobacco merchant, which dates back to 1688. And many names, apparently, how this ended up in this archive is not very certain, but many tobacco merchants are mentioned in that book, and also Abraham is mentioned in that book. Yeah. And I think this was the presentation.
Thank you. First question, both Kevin and I, whilst you've been talking, have been desperately looking through the Velial burial records, the early burial records of London. And there is a Judith Vitoria who was buried there in, we're not sure if it's 1670 or 1671. I wonder if she might be the mother.
Yeah, of course, the marriage registration is from 1673,
yeah.
And there it still says parents in England. So then it may seem as if the mother is also still alive, but of course that doesn't need to be the case. So that that perhaps could be an option. On the other hand, I don't know if the Benjamin Levy in London, because he's mentioned almost always as Benjamin Levy. Even in this document, which was made up in London, he says, I'm Benjamin Levy and I give my son Abraham Levi Vitoria the powers to settle the issue. So he doesn't seem to use the Vitoria name himself. Where he lives.
I have to ask about growing tobacco in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
It seems such an eccentric thing.
I don't know if it was of good quality, but as I said, they usually used it to blend it with, probably they had to import a lot of tobacco from the New World, from North America. And perhaps that was not enough to meet the demands that they had in North Europe. So perhaps they needed extra tobacco because they knew they could sell it. And they probably needed to make a blend with, well, perhaps real tobacco of good quality to have some kind of presentable tobacco. But I'm not sure because, as I said, the tobacco growing has been going on until I think the first half of the 20th century. So that there must have been something there that it was worthwhile to grow it in the Netherlands. Yeah, I don't know if it was grown in England as well. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Maya's just posted that they grew tobacco in southern Sweden as well, which is even more north. So
yeah.
But Tom, I think you're unmuted.
Yeah. There's a question from Judith Jackson. Could women join the community?
I think the women were always, that sounds strange, but the women always followed their men. So they, I don't know, perhaps if they were widows, that they would have some sort of standing, but I don't, perhaps you know that, Tom, if they, are they mentioned in the Finta lists? Do they pay?
From circa 1680. Then they were allowed to pay taxes. And you can see that the community had a need for money. They were all in need of money. But then it was particularly so they allowed women to pay taxes. But in return, women were not allowed to participate in votes or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And were they particularly widows, or could they?
No, they were also unmarried.
Yeah,
unmarried daughters of the richer part of the community. But I don't think they had voting rights until until the last century.
Okay. But Bernard, you have your hand up.
I do indeed, yes. Marcus, thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. I'm still trying, and I'm going to make this a general question to both you and Ton. I'm trying to get my head around this changing into and out of the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic communities, and the simultaneous membership of both And I wonder if either or both of you can say something about that. But I have a couple of specific questions as well. In searching for my Sephardic family, I come across various Italianders, more often with a double A than an AE. But I dismissed them because they were almost always either buried in Ouderkerk or married to people who were. But I see that my ninth grandfather was Abraham Levi Vitoria's third great-grandfather, and he was an Alexander Ziskind Eliezer Witzenhausen. And he was apparently born somewhere before 1599, died in 1677 in Amsterdam, and is buried in Ouderkerk. And I wondered if you can say something about how the German Ashkenazi side of the family came into Holland. And then very specifically, have you done any research on the Venice side, since they claimed to come from Venice? And this one is of personal interest to me because of research I'm doing. Do you know where the Sephardic synagogue in Denmark was? I'll leave it at that. I've got some others, but that's greedy.
No, I know that. I don't know if Alan Falk is known to you. He gave me some information on the Italiaenders and the Moresco families in Denmark.
Alan Falk.
Alan Falk, yes.
Was
and
there,
perhaps Tom or David may know him as well. He probably, and perhaps I even have his address, or the address of the synagogue in Copenhagen. I'm very interested to see that your or the Italiaenders that you came across, because I can probably perhaps see something, and also very interested in the Witzenhausen link, because Rebecca Hammelberg, who was married to his first wife, probably her mother was a Witzenhausen, probably. So that's
my Witzenhausen line comes down through a family of Srabs, and his goes in a different direction. I mean, Abraham's goes in a different direction.
Yeah.
So as I said, I didn't follow those because I was looking for Sephardic roots.
Yeah.
And I thought anybody that I bring in that is Ashkenazi is just going to cause contention. But now I'm interested because I don't have to find that proof. And I'm fascinated to know where they came from. And
because I think the Morescos are also an example, perhaps, of, they have also Italian roots. And they may also have Sephardic background. I think these Italians may not have been always very welcome in a community where there was a lot of Portuguese and Spanish. I mean, that they may have been looked at a bit different by the real Portuguese or the real Spanish. Sephardi.
What is real? Can I just ask, where is Alan Falk? Is he in Holland? Is he in Denmark?
No, he's Danish. He's
Danish. Okay,
yes.
I will look for him.
Actually, I saw, because I was looking up something today, I saw that he published an article. Well, perhaps I can get your email address from Tom or David, and we could have some contact on these questions you have.
Yeah, but Bernard, if you just email me, I can forward it on to Marius.
I will indeed, thank you. And the general question that I was asking about this dance between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, which I find fascinating. And it also explains a bit some of the mixed families that I kept finding, particularly when they're passing rules saying, you can't join us. But then immediately they let people. I'm presuming that money was usually involved.
Yeah, and I think so. Yes, it's strange, but also the fact that the children of Abraham and Gracia did not marry perhaps also means that they were, I don't know why that is, but why shouldn't they marry? They could only marry Portuguese partners, I guess, but all of their brothers and sisters were married with Ashkenazi partners. So I don't know if that played a role in the fact that they did not marry at all. And I think it was pretty unique to find such a family, because I don't think we know many examples of this. But I think the Italian, because the Cohens that they mixed with, it is said of the Cohens that they also came from Italy. So perhaps there was a more natural bond with people who came from Italy, though they were Ashkenazi, that you could also bond with them instead of
I think I have some of the Italian Cohens, and again, I didn't follow them because they were Ashkenazi, but now I'm interested.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Francis, you have a question.
Yes, I'm just interested in the historical context, because William and Mary went to the throne in England in 1688. And the background to all of this is huge political upheaval, post-English Revolution, 1642, Cromwell, end of Cromwell, and so on and so forth. And I'm just wondering how the Jewish communities negotiated that, what happened to them during it, because it really was a time of such enormous change and complexity, culturally, politically, and internationally. I mean, going to America, etc., etc., etc. What have you got to say?
Well, of course, I think in the Netherlands the situation was pretty. I think it was not as hectic as it may have been in England, and I think the community in England was also more recent than the one in Amsterdam, which was more established at this time. Also, looking at these buildings, they had already accomplished something. So, because I think if Benjamin was in London, then he must also have been one of the first, of the relatively early Jews in London, in the Sephardic community.
Yes, and what was the atmosphere around them? Was there a sort of anti-Semitism, or was there, on the whole, an acceptance? And what were the different classes they were in? Some obviously were very well off, and others, as you've pointed out, were much more tradespeople.
Yeah, but perhaps David can say something about the English, the London situation.
Well, there was a few rich families at the top and a lot of very poor families down below. I think, Ton would know better than me. I've always assumed that the Amsterdam community was more prosperous, but maybe I'm fantasizing.
It's in both communities. It was a mix of rich, middle class, and poor people. The rich were maybe 5 to 10%, the middle class 40%, and the poor were half of the population.
Really? Right.
And the rich mingled with the English upper class and married, in some cases, into how do you call it, gentry.
Yes.
And there was intermarriage, interaction. They did business together, and the level below, middle class, they also did business with English Protestants, but the level below, didn't mix. Yeah. And kept to themselves. And in Holland it was more or less the same.
And did they?
In 1688,
yeah.
I don't know what the English Jews did, but the Dutch Jews financed the expedition of William III to England.
Actually, they also financed James II. They backed both horses.
Yeah, they financed. There was the Baron de Soissons, who in short order was able to raise 2 million guilders. And famously, he refused a receipt from William III, saying that he only needed his word and not his signature. I don't know if he got his money back, though. I suppose so.
They were on all
But there's-
sides then in the Protestant
there
Catholic
were
struggle.
other-
They were on both
other
sides.
Portuguese- Sorry?
They were on both sides in the Catholic Protestant
Yes,
struggle.
but you have to remember that William III was invited by the English
Yes,
to invade England, and I think
that's right.
that the upper class of the Portuguese Jews were on the same side, I suppose.
Actually, I once heard Diane Toledano, who later became Haim Toledano in Amsterdam, give quite an impassioned, I would almost describe it as a speech in support of James II, several hundred years later, saying that he was actually quite good to the Jews. But I don't know. It's worth actually saying that our speaker next week, Tirza Levi-Bernfeld, wrote the outstanding book on the Sephardic Torah in Amsterdam.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Back to a question from Bernard Miller about the acceptance of Ashkenazim in the Portuguese community. That's a complex thing. In the beginning, there were only Portuguese Jews, so-called Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam. They were the first. And after that came the Spanish and the Moroccans and the Italians. And at a certain moment, Ashkenazi started to trickle in, and they were accepted in the Portuguese community. But then the trickle became a stream, and the Portuguese felt threatened by that, afraid that they would take over the synagogue. So then they started to slowly distantiate themselves from the Ashkenazim. In a process that took about 30 years, from 1640, forbidding people to be buried, Ashkenazic people to be buried in Berckheyde, to eventually forbidding marriages between Portuguese and Ashkenazi. And in between, they ended their support to the poor Ashkenazim, saying that the Ashkenazim had to look after themselves. This was a long process, but there were a few families, and there are always examples of people falling in between the cracks. A few families, like the Italiaenders and the Bassan family, Italian examples are these, who were suspected of being of Ashkenazic descent, but because they came from Italy, that was hard to prove. And maybe money played a role in accepting them into the community. But there were other examples. There was a Cohen family accepted into the Portuguese community. But how do you say that? The first one of their family was only allowed to pay promessas, voluntary contributions. And it's only his descendants who were allowed as Finta paying members of the community. So, but these are the exceptions about which the archives are mostly silent, and only now and then you find traces of proof for the acceptance of a few Ashkenazic families into the Portuguese community. But after 1700, if a Portuguese person married an Ashkenazim, he was thrown out of the community. And this changed again in 1810. But those were different times. Are there any questions on YouTube, David?
No, just several people saying thank you, and they really enjoyed it.
Ali Ergensoy remarked that the arms that were shown on the tobacco slide, whereas the brand of the family, the Italiaender, showed the British royal arms. And he asks if maybe the family sold tobacco to the royal family.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if that was the case. Certainly, no, I haven't come across that. But that, yeah, it's this. I don't know if you can see this picture, but that's
yes,
that's the.
It could just be patriotism. I mean, because you've got the whole Jacobite thing presumably going on around that time.
It says London, so it might be the British Royal Arms. So there might be a royal tobacco
warrant
of the royal family.
Yeah, this is probably second half of the 18th century, or perhaps even closer to so close to 1800.
It's strange because it says London and the text below is in Dutch.
Yes.
So we have to study that one.
Yeah, it's a very interesting.
It's a mix.
Yeah.
I think we can wrap it up now, David.
I think so. Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. It's very interesting because when one sees something which is slightly out of focus from the normal, it just makes one think more carefully about everything else. So it's absolutely fascinating subject. And did we ever get an answer on researching in Venice? I suppose it's just one of those things that never finishes.
No, I still need to go to Venice and see whether I think Tom had some suggestion of approaching someone about the Italian connection, because Venice is very interesting. I think they had about 5 synagogues over there, and so perhaps it's difficult, but also very interesting to see whether I can find something else there as well. Yeah.
A name like Vitoria should help.
Yeah, perhaps.
Well, thank you very much, Marius.
You're very welcome.
I enjoyed it very much.
It was excellent.
You touched on some subjects that are close to my interests also, and apparently also close to the interests of others. David, the speaker of next week, you announced her, is Tirza Levi-Bernveld, and she will deliver a talk about the Belogrados, the ones who came from Belgrade to Amsterdam circa 1690 in the course of a war. And this will also be an interesting talk, and I hope to see you all there next week, especially our patrons, to whom we are very grateful for making this possible. David?
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I can see there's a couple of people who have joined us from the United States, so thank you very much and happy Independence Day. Many thanks to Marius, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. So goodbye and thank you.
Bye.